My name is Corey Stevens, and I will be doing my presentation over stereotypes in relation with crime, and I will be focusing primarily on the 1800s to present. Slide 2. For hundreds of years, men and women have been treated differently on the basis of crime, as well as the punishment for the crime. Focus question and thesis. The focus question of my research is, why does certain crime seem to be a women's crime? Why are men accused of violent crime and punished more harshly? The thesis is, crime, performed by both males and females, is viewed and punished differently based on gender and stereotypes that are associated. Slide 3. Women's crime and stereotypes. Women are often stereotyped as less fit physically to be associated with violent crime, such as murder. Women are often stereotyped as not being associated with violent crime, and are not accused of murder as often as men. Women are often stereotyped as associated with non-violent crime, such as robbery, fraud, or drug possession. Women are often stereotyped as too sweet or too delicate to be associated with certain crimes, which are often too violent, such as homicide by strangulation. Women are often stereotyped to fit other crimes, such as poisoning, because poisoning is viewed as a weak person's way of homicide. Because of these stereotypes, women are often not punished as severely as men. Slide 4. Florence Maybrick. This brings us to the next slide, which examines one of the primary sources I used in my research, this being a publication from the London Times about Florence Maybrick. Florence Maybrick was an American woman convicted in Great Britain of murdering her considerably older husband, James Maybrick, in 1889. In April of 1889, Florence Maybrick bought a flypaper containing arsenic and later soaked it in a bowl of water. At her trial, she claimed that this method allowed her to extract the arsenic for cosmetic use. James Maybrick was taken ill on April 27, 1889. His doctors treated him, but his condition deteriorated. James Maybrick died at his home on May 11, 1889. His brother, suspicious as to the cause of his death, had his body examined. It was found to contain traces of arsenic. Florence Maybrick was charged with his murder by poisoning and stood trial at St. George's Hall in Liverpool, where she was convicted and sentenced to death. But Florence Maybrick would not face death or even severe punishment, as she was viewed as too sweet or too delicate. After detention in prisons, Florence Maybrick was released in January of 1904, having spent only 14 years in custody after being sentenced to death for the killing of her husband. Slide 5. Women's crime statistics. According to the FBI and the United States Department of Justice, about 27% of those arrested in the United States are female. Women account for about 20% of violent crimes. Women account for about 37% of property crime. Women represent 10.5% of homicide convictions and are less likely to be convicted of sex-related homicides, as well as domestic homicides. Women constitute 1.1% of those arrested for forcible rape. Women constitute 2.1% of those arrested for robbery. Women constitute 15% of those arrested for burglary. Women constitute 17% of those arrested for arson. Women constitute 19.3% of those arrested for vandalism. Women constitute 18.5% of those arrested for motor vehicle theft. Women constitute 20.3% of those arrested for offenses against family and children. Women constitute 32.2% of those arrested for aggravated assault. Women constitute 42.3% of those arrested for fraud. Women constitute 43.7% of those arrested for larceny theft. Lastly, females constitute 48.7% of those arrested for embezzlement. Slide 6. Men's crime and stereotypes. Men are stereotyped as being more often brutal and violent than women, which transitions into crime as well as punishment. Men are often stereotyped as more fit physically to be associated with violent crime, such as murder. Men are often stereotyped as being associated with violent crime and are accused of murder more often than women. Men are often more severely punished, certainly including the death penalty, than women. Slide 7. Men's crime and statistics. According to the FBI and the United States Department of Justice, males were convicted of the vast majority of homicides in the United States, representing 89.5% of the total number of offenders. Males were more likely to be murder victims. Males were most likely to be victims of drug-related and gang-related homicides. 98.9% of those arrested for forcible rape. Males constituted for 87.9% of those arrested for robbery. Males constituted for 85% of those arrested for burglary. Males constituted for 83% of those arrested for arson. Males constituted for 81.7% of those arrested for vandalism. Males constituted for 81.5% of those arrested for motor vehicle theft. Males constituted for 79.7% of those arrested for offenses against family or children. Males constituted for 77.8% of those arrested for aggravated assault. Males constituted for 58.7% of those arrested for fraud. Males constituted for 57.3% of those arrested for larceny theft. And lastly, males constituted for 51.3% of those arrested for embezzlement. Slide 8. Conclusion. In conclusion, over time, society has associated stereotypes with both male and female crime. Men's stereotypes often lead to men being punished more severely for crime than women, even if a man and woman commits the same crime. Men are still seen as more violent and more criminal than women in today's society. Crime, including male and female, is viewed and punished differently based on gender and stereotypes. Men are stereotyped as violent and associated with violent crimes, such as mutilation after enduring homicide. On the other hand, women are stereotyped as more likely to commit certain crimes, such as poisoning. Slide 9. Bibliography.